Memory refresher here. Equilibrium price is 20. Equilibrium quantity is 5. What is consumer surplus? For some reason, these numbers are different than on the workbook, so I guess just scribble out the numbers on the workbook. So what that means, that dot here, if you can see it, that is equilibrium. Let's try to calculate consumer surplus. How do we get there? Well, consumer surplus is everything below the demand, above the price. Below the demand, above the price. That is a triangle. So we have a base of 5, so 0 to 5. Our height goes from 20 to 40. So 40 minus 20 is our height, times a half because it's a triangle, gets us to a consumer surplus of 50. Another kind of neat thing that we can do is we can use the idea of a consumer surplus to think about what is happening in when we have a price decrease. So let me show you what I mean. Let's think about what happens when the price of something goes down. So we'll think about the price of ice cream goes down. Well, we're going to say we start off at P1 and the price goes down to P2. The first thing that happens is we get this extra surplus in the form of the green rectangle. What's going on here? All the people who were buying ice cream paying P1, now they're only paying P2, so we're going to be better off, right? If ice cream goes from $5 to $4, everyone who was buying ice cream is $1 better off. You can take that dollar and do something else with it. The other thing that happens is there were people in here who valued ice cream at more than $4, less than $5, and those people are now buying ice cream. Think about it. Before, when they weren't buying ice cream, there was no surplus there, right? If I don't buy ice cream, I get no enjoyment out of it. Whereas once I buy ice cream, now I'm able to get some enjoyment, right? So here I valued it at $3.99, and I bought it for $4. I valued it at, I guess this would be $3.99, $4.99. I only have to pay $4 for it, so I'm 99 cents better. You have all these extra people now who are able to consume ice cream and they get some enjoyment. So that's the yellow. Next, we're going to talk about producer surplus. Consumer surplus does not tell the full story. We also care about the firms producing the goods that consumers buy. So if we are trying to think about the overall wealth created by a market, so overall, how much better are we by the fact that ice cream markets exist? Well, we think not just about how much enjoyment Michael gets from the ice cream, but we think also about how much money the profits of the person who owns the ice cream store. Another way to think of it, remember we had the example of buying a gift card to a restaurant you like on eBay. And we said if, it's a $50 gift card and you're getting ready to go to that restaurant tonight, you might be willing to pay $49 because, you were going to spend $50 anyway, so you're $1 better off. Well, the other person we can think about being made better off here is the person selling you the gift card, right? So they have a $50 gift card for a restaurant they don't like. And by selling it to you, they're able to get money off out of it. And so they're made better off by the fact that they would rather have cash than a gift card to a restaurant they don't like. And so we want to think about how much wealth is created for them, how much better off they are. So producer surplus is the difference between the price producers receive for a good or service and the minimum price they're willing to accept for it. And well, the graphic definition there is it is the area between the supply curve and the price. Why is that? Well, the price you receive That's the price of the good, right? So if I sold my gift card for $45, the price I received is the price of the good. What's the minimum price you're willing to accept? That is the supply curve. Let's think about why that is. So we talked about Michael's demand for ice cream before. Now we will talk about Schrute Farms, which is a beet growing farm. As the price of beets goes up, we're going to grow more beets, right? That's a law of supply. So let's start off thinking that the price is low and the price is only $1 per beet. Well, at that price, I'll grow one beet, or Dwight Mose will grow one beet. And what that means is this is sort of, he's got a little beet garden in his front yard, just does it for fun, and maybe he spends $1 in seed and soil or whatever to grow that beet. And so as long as he can sell that for $1, he's going to grow that beet. Below $1, he would just opt not grow any beets. So the minimum price he's willing to accept for that one beet is $1. Okay? Next, what happens when the price of beets goes up and up and up? He's going to grow more beets. So now it becomes worth it for him to set up a farm and for him to till some of the less fertile ground and to spend more time and hire somebody to grow some of the beets. And so as the price goes up, he's willing to grow more beets. And so what's producer surplus is the difference between how much he's actually paid for the beet and how much he would be willing to accept for the beet, his lowest price. So we said that for this first beet, he needs at least $1, or else it's not worth it to him to grow it. He sells it, he's actually able to sell it for $3, so he's making $2 per beet on that beet. Okay, well, we have that. How much does he make from the second beet, third beet, and so on? So we have this is how much his surplus is on each beet, or think of it like his profit. Okay, well, what have we done before to add arrows? We turn it into an area of a triangle. So all those arrows together give us this green triangle, which is producer surplus. So now we've learned about consumer surplus, and we've learned about producer surplus. Now let's think about putting them together, right? We said that if we care about total wealth created by a market, we want to think about both consumers and producers. So let's go ahead, combine producers and consumers, and that is going to be what we call total economic surplus. So economic surplus is a measure of the total wealth created by a market. So total wealth, thinking about both producers and consumers. It is equal to consumer surplus plus producer surplus. So CS plus PS. Also can be referred to as welfare or total welfare. It's the idea of this total amount of enjoyment, well-being, wealth we get from the fact that this market exists. And so let's sort of see if we can think about what's going on here. We'll suppose we have the supply and demand curve, and if the price is P1, then we would get producer surplus like this, above the supply, below the price, consumer surplus here, below the demand, above price. It's either it's welfare or total welfare. It's not really, it's just sometimes you'll see described differently in different places. Okay. Let's think about sort of the cause of this. How do we get this total surplus? Well, let's think about we'll think about this, the first bite of ice cream, or the first beet. First beet, Dwight would be willing to sell for $1. Someone is willing to pay $10 for it. So what that means is, if the first unit costs $1 to make, and it's valued at $10, we have $9 in surplus to divide up, right? Because as long as that beet gets made by Dwight and purchased by this person, overall we are $9 better off. How we divide it depends on price, right? So if if the buyer pays $10, if they have to pay their full willingness to pay. They'll get 0 in surplus, but Dwight would get all of this. He would get the full $9 in surplus. Made it for 1, sold it for 10. Or if the buyer is able to buy it for $1, then Dwight gets no surplus. Cost him $1 to make it, he sold it for $1. He would get 0 surplus. The other person would get the full $10, $9. They valued it to 10. They only paid 1, so that person would get $9 in surplus. So again, the fact that this transaction occurs, whatever the price is, the fact that Dwight makes it and someone else consumes it means that we are getting $9 in surplus. A market at equilibrium is one where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. I'll go back for just a second. This point right here is equilibrium, right? Quantity supplied equals quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Well, a market at equilibrium is one where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. And we saw earlier that most markets will be in equilibrium. We had the Marios and the Luigis, and so when price was above the equilibrium price, what would happen is the sellers would undercut each other until we got a equilibrium. If the price was below the equilibrium price, there'd be sort of a bidding war as the buyers bid the price up until we got to equilibrium. So most markets will be in equilibrium. That's just what the price that they will find their way to. Okay, is this the best possible outcome? And we're going to think about specifically. We're going to declare that what we mean, when we say best, what we mean is highest total surplus. Well, let's look at prices above and below the equilibrium price, because what we want to see is, all right, maybe we'll find that if we choose a price above equilibrium or below, that actually increases surplus, in which case we would say that equilibrium is not the best outcome. That's the idea. Let's see if that's the case. Okay, so let's suppose we have a higher price. So for whatever reason, price winds up here. What are consumer and producer surplus? Well, first thing we know is at this high price, the quantity will now be here, QT. It's below equilibrium quantity, because at this high price, we don't get very many units demanded. Quantity moves to the left. We produce less. Okay, so consumer surplus is small. It makes sense, right? This is, we force the price to be $9 per beet. Not many people are going to buy beets. And the ones that do will have paid such a high price that they don't get much surplus. How about producer surplus? Well, producers are going to sell for a high price, so the producer surplus goes all the way up to here. But they're selling fewer units, so it looks like this. So what that leaves us with are all these what we call missing trades. So these are all the beets that, because the price was so high, no one was willing to pay that much, so Dwight doesn't bother to grow them, which means there's no available surplus. This is missing economic surplus from the beets that are not grown. Okay, so what we see here is that charging too high of a price is bad. We miss out on all this economic surplus. What if we charge a lower price, the below equilibrium price? What if the price is down here? Well, when that happens, producers are not going to like it, right? Dwight is not going to grow very many beets, and once he does grow, he won't be able to sell for a high price. Next is consumer surplus. Consumer surplus, this is if I'm one of the people who gets these beets. So I'm one of the people who likes beets and is able to get the beet at this low price, then I get surplus, I get significant surplus, right? So all of these people are getting a nice big surplus because of the fact that the price is so low. However, there are plenty of people who would like to buy beets and they're willing to pay more than it costs Dwight to grow them, but because the price is forced so low, Dwight's not willing to grow these. So these are missing trades, which means we have missing economic surplus. So notice that if we charge price above equilibrium or below the equilibrium price, we're worse off. We do not get full economic surplus. And so we get this, what I think is a pretty neat result here, which is that equilibrium is not just how markets are. Remember, markets on their own will generally find their way to equilibrium. They're not just how markets are. Equilibrium maximizes total surplus. Another way you could say it, if our goal is to maximize total surplus, we could say equilibrium is not just how markets are, equilibrium is how markets should be. So like I said, it's a really neat result, which is showing that if we let markets get to equilibrium, not only do we have stable prices, but we also are going to get an outcome where we've created the most wealth. Next, we're going to think a little bit more about this graded triangle here, this missing economic surplus. So we're going to learn this term called a deadweight loss. It is sometimes the case that a market is not in equilibrium, as we just saw, so something like a price ceiling. It is valuable to know how much worse off we are because of this. So how much surplus is lost? And the term for this is a deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is the value of the economic surplus that is foregone when a market is not allowed to adjust to its equilibrium. So again, how much worse off are we? How to think about it is, what is the area of that gray triangle? That's deadweight loss. What we have here is, and we're going to look at a market with a price ceiling. So without the price ceiling, this is what our surplus looks like. Just what we've seen before. This big triangle here is the total surplus. We have consumer surplus here above the price, producer surplus here below the price. Now let's suppose we put in a price ceiling. So the price ceiling here, PC, remember what we've done? We've made a law that you can't sell for price higher than this. So we can think about when we talked about rent control, right? So we have a maximum amount you can charge in rent. When that happens, we're going to get fewer units supplied, right? We force the price lower. Law of supply says if we make price lower, quantity supplied goes down, so we're only getting this many units supplied. Okay? Well, we actually just talked about this, right? What happens when the price is too low? What happens with surplus? Well, if your consumer surplus, area below the demand curve above the price for all the units that are sold, consumer surplus, producer surplus is right here. Everything above the supply curve below the price. Deadweight loss is all that we've foregone. So if we compare this total surplus here, so the total area of the big triangle here, with total surplus here, this area right here, this gray area is what we've missed out on, right? This is how much smaller the area is. This is the part of the big triangle we don't get a surplus anymore. So the neat thing about this is this graph is going to support all the things we talked about earlier when we were learning about rent control and price ceilings. The graph supports it. For example, the consumers who get the good are better off, right? So the consumer surplus area is larger for these consumers, right? So if you're one of these consumers, if you're Monica and Rachel, you don't have to pay this price. You have to pay this low price. So you're loving it. You're getting a nice big surplus. So consumers who get the good are better off, as we discussed. Firms are clearly worse off, right? So if I'm a landlord or thinking about becoming one, I would much rather charge this high equilibrium price than this lower ceiling price. So the producer surplus triangle gets a lot smaller. Firms are clearly worse off. Next, we could think a little bit more about the deadweight loss and the change in supply. So we get fewer units supplied. So in equilibrium, we would have this many because the price ceiling goes down to here. So fewer units supply. And we think about here, this brings us to the deadweight loss, right? These units right here, the deadweight loss comes from transactions that don't happen. All of these apartments here that aren't rented out to anyone. So think about we talked about the apartments that are turned into condos, or the apartment buildings that aren't built because the developers can't charge a high enough price to make it work. Next thing we'll look at are taxes. Specifically, we're going to look at what we call tax on demanders. You can think of this as a tax that buyers have to pay. Once again, what we're going to think about here is initially our demand looks like here. This is our regular demand. How much do I like the good? Then we'll suppose there's a $4 per unit tax put in place. So on the buyer. So every time you buy a pack of cigarettes, the government takes $4 from you. So you have when you get your receipt, you have price of cigarettes here plus $4 in tax. There's your total amount paid. Okay. So what that means is, suppose that before, if the price of cigarettes was $8, somebody would buy 40 units. Okay. Well, if we put a tax on cigarettes, and I use this as an example because cigarettes are very heavily taxed. So if we put a $4 tax on cigarettes, well, if I'm a buyer, I don't really care if I am paying, who the money goes to. I'm just thinking about how much I'm paying for the cigarettes. So before it was a case that if you priced it at $12, I would buy 40. Well, now what that means is I'm willing to put out a total of $12 per tax, $12 per pack for cigarettes. If that's the case, I'll buy 40. Well, if you put a $4 tax on, now if you want me to buy 40 units, the seller has to cut the price to 8. Because now, instead of paying the seller 12, I'm paying the seller 8 and an extra 4 to the government in taxes. So this demand is how much I like the good. This is my adjusted demand after we think about I pay an extra $4 taxes on every good. Okay? So notice, again, if you want me to buy 40, it used to be you could charge me $12. Now you can only charge me 8 because I'm paying $4 in taxes. So now let's think about how that affects surplus. First thing I'm gonna mention, let's think about is, all right, what does consumer and producer surplus look like? So right now I am paying $12. So I'm buying 40 units. How do we know that? Because this is where supply intersects with the new demand curve. So that happens right here. And that happens at a price or a quantity of 40. And notice what this means is I am paying this equilibrium price of 8 to the producer plus an extra $4 in taxes. So my total spending on the cigarettes are $12 per pack. So if I'm spending $12, this is how much I like the good. That light blue represents how much do I like the good, am I willing to pay in total. So this right here is my producer surplus. Now we can think about consumer surplus. Or sorry, that is consumer surplus. Now we can think about producer surplus. Producer surplus is going to be everything above the supply curve, below the price. And what we have to remember here is when we're thinking about price, what we want to think about is the amount that the producer is getting. So remember, the consumer is paying a total price of 12. The producer is only getting 8 of that. So as far as the producer is concerned, the price is $8. So everything below that $8 price above the supply curve, right? That's right here. Okay, so what is that? That is producer surplus. There's one more thing we want to think about here, and that is the taxes that are collected. And so what we want to think about is it's that when the taxes are collected, hopefully the government doesn't, the state that gets them isn't just wasting the money. We think they're going to do something, build roads or build schools or something that we value. And so what that means is we want to think about the tax revenue as being another sort of surplus. Well, what's tax revenue? Well, in this example, we sold 40 units. 40 units. There's $4 in taxes on each unit. So the total tax revenue is the area of that rectangle. Right, so now we can put all of this together. So we have our tax revenue here. And we have consumer surplus and producer surplus. So what is our deadweight loss? This little triangle right here. What's going on there? These are all the transactions that would have occurred without a tax that don't. So these are all the people who valued cigarettes at something more than $8, but weren't willing to pay the full $12 with tax price. So these are all the transactions that don't happen. So once again, deadweight loss is a triangle represent the trades that would create wealth. The amount people are willing to pay exceeds the cost of producing them, but do not happen. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll do a couple of top hat questions on stuff we've done today. First, in equilibrium, price is $8 and quantity is $40. So, right, price of 8, quantity of 40. What is total economic surplus? Remember, that means consumer plus producer surplus. Right, so the answer here is 320. And what we need to remember is we have to think about both consumer and producer surplus. So consumer surplus is the one in this teal color. What is that? What is that equal to? We take our height, which goes from 8 to 16. So 16 minus 8 is our height. The base of the triangle is 40. There's 40 units in equilibrium times a half because we have triangle. That equals 160. What is producer surplus? Producer surplus, the height of this triangle, goes from 0 to 8. The base is 40 again. It's the quantity. Times a half because it's a triangle. That is also equal to 160. So all that's left for us to do to calculate total surplus is just add up consumer plus producer, 160 plus 160, which gets us a 320. Next thing we'll do is we will look at one more problem that talks about finding producer, consumer, and deadweight loss when we have price control in place and we're not in equilibrium. So equilibrium price is PE, so equilibrium. A price ceiling of PC is imposed. What is the deadweight loss? So that's our first one we'll look at is what's deadweight loss. Okay, so the answer here is B. It is E plus F. I will, because we did this one, which was sort of the most, the one that sort of summarized producer plus consumer, comparing that with equilibrium. Just to remind us, the price ceiling is PC. This right here is consumer surplus, so A plus B plus C. Producer surplus is D. Price ceiling means low producer surplus. So that gives us, that's our total surplus with the price ceiling, E and F for what we're missing out on because we have the price ceiling.